Hello, welcome to Pod Mavericks Presents After Dark. It's an off-season edition. We're recording and going live on YouTube. It is June 27th. It's Tuesday night. It's about 9 o'clock. This is Kirk Henderson and Josh Bowe. Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing good. We are off to a better start than the podcast I hosted after the draft because I don't know if you listened, but we recorded about 15 minutes and I didn't hit the start record button. Broadcasting button. And
that button up there is a bit tricky because you got to click it twice.
Yes, I clicked it and I was like, I swear I clicked it, but yeah.
It's great. I was reading all the comments from that one today, where I think one of the things that gets lost on people who watch it later is live reaction shows are very difficult because you're working with incomplete information.
Yeah.
And, that's the first time I've been off grid for a Mavericks transactional period in 10 years. And I wasn't off grid, but I wasn't doing anything.
And you weren't in the country.
Yeah, I wasn't in the country. Yeah. And it's funny. That night we were celebrating a friend's birthday and I was kind of looking at my phone at the table. And then I was like explaining to a couple of guys there, like what I thought was happening. It was an interesting process, but it was a shockingly really productive draft night. I think in the days since, we didn't know this at the time. Tim Cato said on his show either later that night or the next day, 77 Minutes in Heaven, that the decisions made were very much made by Nico Harrison, Michael Finley, and the front office team, with I think Mark Cuban taking a more hands-off role than he might have had in some of this stuff in recent years. Granted, it's not like they've had that many draft picks even to make in the last 10 years because the Mavericks have not necessarily valued.
Where does that come from? Where did that comes down from the top?
Right. But I'll tell you, it was an interesting thing to go through real time where when they traded back and moved off of Bertan's contract, that was really something. That was when I was like, okay, this is special because Oklahoma, the Thunder, have been one of two teams that have inadvertently sort of devalued the draft to a degree because they have so many draft picks that they can't, it's like taking on a guy like Bertans is not necessarily a big deal to them because they're not paying mega contracts yet outside of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So I really thought it was something that the Mavericks were able to move back 2 picks and then still select the guy that they wanted. As I understand it, they were concerned about the Pelicans picking Dereck Lively at 14, which is why they did not trade back any further. So that pick in and of itself was an interesting one for me. I had talked with Rafael Barlow, and he had been very high on Lively when he came on our show here.
Mm-hmm. And
at the same time, though, it's an immediate tough sell because he did not play a ton. He played, he was on one of the ACC defensive teams despite limited minutes. There's a lot of promise, but a team that's helmed by Luka Doncic doesn't necessarily have time for promise. And that's where we're going to have some fun, I think, talking about these guys. But along with, sending off Bertans, they also developed this incredible trade exception, which something that they were clearly working on for weeks. This is the part that's like the real chef's kiss.
Yeah, the second move is what made the draft.
And I've not honestly said this guy's name out loud, and so I'm gonna have to have you say. I don't know. You say it for me. I'm going to butcher it.
Olivier-Maxence Prosper.
Okay.
I probably messed that up.
Lovingly called Omax. which makes me
Yes.
think of Baymax from Big Hero 6, but that's a different thing. And so then they also got that pick from the Kings. Shout out to the Kings, 2 drafts in a row that they send us a pick when we get a player that Mavericks fans are instantly very into, along with the 2 years remaining on Richaun Holmes' deal. Now we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but the Mavericks still haven't announced Richaun Holmes is on the team. So at the night of, it was pretty neat because we had a Joe Holbert, who's an NBA writer. He wrote for us 2 years ago, and I cannot find the article, and neither can Joe, but he had this really good theory about how Luka Doncic and Richaun Holmes might pair together really well because of the way Richaun Holmes takes this 14 to 17 foot push shot, which looks like an old man YMCA shot. It just doesn't look like an NBA player shot, and he's really good at it. And like with him and Luka in the short roll, like could be really, really fun. So it's like I walk away from that with, not really knowing much about Omax outside of the fact that I knew the Celtics wanted him, and that completely ruined their night, as evidenced by the fact that they traded back 3 times. So it's like I'm sitting there in Mexico positively thrilled by the end of the evening. So let's kind of walk through you and Jordan's reactions now that you've had some time to reflect.
Yeah, it was very interesting, doing it live because we kind of got the range of emotions. Because when we found out that, we recorded after this all happened, at least after Lively was taken. But of course, realizing that one of Taylor Hendricks or Cam Whitmore, the forward from Villanova, was going to be available at 10, it was like, okay, they're getting one of the consensus top 9. Bilal Coulibaly jumped into the top 9. Me and you have said repeatedly,
all it takes is one.
It never goes chalk. Like it's never the 9 guys that everyone mocks. Like someone sneaks in there, or 10, whatever range you want to take. Someone always sneaks in once you get outside of like top 5 range or top 3 range, really. So just kind of processing that. Once Whitmore continued to fall, the sting of not selecting him, at least for me, dissipated because I'm going to be honest, I'm not a college guy. I don't watch draft. We have guys on the site that's what they like to do. You could not tell me who Cam Whitmore was 6 months ago, so I am not going to act shocked or appalled that the Mavericks did not draft this guy when
certainly not the night of.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. And then what makes doing a live show hard is you talked about like being prepared. I talked to Logan Thompson before the draft, I think on Tuesday. And one of the topics we covered, I was like, all right, tell me about the wings in the 20s, the 20 to 30 range, because they're probably going to trade down. They didn't trade down. They traded back in. And I think he mentioned him briefly, but we talked about a bunch of other guys. So, of course, the Mavericks drafted like the one guy I just did not know in that range. So I basically was like, Jordan, just tell me, like, I don't know who he is. I just don't. All I know is that like he's been rising up boards. Like all the smart draft people we know really liked him the last like 2 or 3 weeks, I think, of the process. So the main thing for me is, since I don't know these guys well enough to offer a concrete opinion past whatever their player archetype projects to be, is more just like the process. And you wrote about it. I wrote about it. Talked about it on the podcast. They took the draft seriously. Whether you like the players they picked or not, they did the thing we've been telling you.
It's just like
use the draft.
There's an element of 2020 here as well, because in 2020, while we didn't love the Green pick, we loved the picks at 30. Was it 31 and 30? And they traded Josh. They traded Seth. Yeah. So they had 3 picks in the 2020 draft. It just turns out, historically, the 2020 draft is one of the biggest crapshoots on the planet. Like Josh Green was actually drafted relatively close to where he might go in a redraft. I think he'd probably go in like the 12 to 15 range instead of 18, where the Mavericks selected him. But, we liked that process then because it was like we talked about bites at the apple. And this was something. We're going to get into elements of, obviously there's like the Ayton non-trade that we're going to talk about, and sort of some team building stuff as we head into free agency. But the process felt good. And I even think, all right, we'll look at elements of this in a year And maybe we'll say, gosh, I really wish they would have taken Cam Whitmore. But the night of the draft, you go with what you know. And in the days since, for example, it's kind of slowly started to leak out that the Villanova coach sandbagged Cam Whitmore in like a way that's probably going to hurt the Villanova program, because stuff like that gets back to recruits and it just doesn't pay off.
It's not good business.
The medicals that don't really know, like even Whitmore seems mystified at that. He played through some injuries there, but he wasn't like a fiery leader as I understand it. I also think he had kind of some pretty rough interview stuff, and that stuff really can affect teams when you're really slicing the dice. But like Whitmore was like a top six guy, and for him to fall to 20 is what it is. But the night of, I couldn't be mad at the Mavericks not taking him, because you have to make the assumption they're working with the best information they have. Picking Lively at 12 and what that means about the team moving forward, I think is really, really fascinating, whether you consider the Ayton trade or not. My friend Josh McSwain is in the chat. He basically dropped into every one of these for the better part of 3 weeks. He was like, no Dereck Lively, no Dereck Lively, no Dereck Lively. Not because he didn't like Dereck Lively. It's just because you're operating on less than complete information. 5 points, 5 rebounds, 20 minutes a game. You extrapolate over 40 minutes. He has some pretty incredible statistics.
His per minute data is outrageous.
It's outrageous. And that's what you have to go with. And then there's also his per minute data on fouling.
Yes,
he is going to be like Jaren Jackson Jr. on the fouling front. And that's
who still has a fouling problem.
Who still has a fouling problem, and wasn't he defensive player of the year?
Yes.
Yeah, so
at least he finished top 2. I think he did.
Fuck it. Like you live with fouls. Like you can teach around fouls. You have to, aggressiveness is, and this is something that I think is underrated at times, particularly when you consider a guy like DeAndre Ayton. You simply cannot teach aggressiveness. So I am settling myself in on the pick for him specifically. Max want to circle back to, but Lively, I am pretty convinced as of this moment right now that the Mavericks need to throw him into the fire and let him figure it out. The best way to get better at basketball is to play basketball. He's probably going to foul out. If you play him 24 minutes a game and he gets 8
Will he reach
points,
24 minutes a game if he...
Right. So it's just like what if it's like, one of the things everybody loved about JaVale McGee, and this is how I knew nobody watched JaVale McGee, is JaVale McGee's box score stuff, his basketball reference page. You're like, oh my God. Well, if we could just get this guy to play 16 minutes instead of 12, he's going to get us rebounds and blocks, and he's going to score easy points. He's a steal. The only problem is he so negatively impacts a basketball game that you don't want him out there on the floor accumulating those stats. But with a guy like Lively, he impacted winning. He impacted winning. And I want to see him play. And, whether or not he starts, whether or not he comes off behind a veteran big man, it's just, you do not tank in the Luka Doncic era, draft players, and then bring them along slowly. Dallas has no choice. They have no choice.
Can I offer you a devil's advocate position? Not necessarily that I disagree, but I just want to bounce this off you and see how you react.
Mm-hmm.
That all makes sense to me. Last season, Jaden Hardy brought along slowly, went to the G League, turned out he progressed very nicely. Why, if that worked for Hardy, can that work for Lively? If you disagree, why? I'm just curious. Not necessarily that I believe that, but I'm just curious because they did bring Hardy along pretty slowly last year.
The way they
there was a demand. There was a demand for Hardy to play a bunch in November and December. So I'm just curious what you think about that.
I think the kind of things that Hardy was bad at, he needed to go against inferior competition and work his way through that and up. That's kind of my first thought, to where Hardy coming into the draft last year fell like a rock because in the G League, he couldn't finish. He couldn't drive. He kind of recklessly drove into the paint. And it was one of these things where they also had enough guard and wing depth to be able to bring him along. Granted, they could have used one more ball handler, as we talked about, but I think the way they brought him along was nice. Now, if what I'm saying is too radical, which is very funny if you know me, I at least want to see an elevated timetable where instead of dividing the series into four, like have a plan by game 40 where you're playing him significant minutes. I understand what I'm asking for probably isn't going to happen because you don't want to break a guy's confidence. The NBA is serious business. I really think that the only way for him to figure it out is to play through some of this stuff. And the difference between a rookie point slash guard slash whatever you want to call Hardy versus a rookie big man is a rookie big man's defensive requirements, job, whatever you want to talk about, is significantly harder. The Mavericks have had saloon doors in the paint, so they have to figure out something immediate. Like he just has to go in and play.
And there's also the case of, we talk about his offense doesn't matter because he's here for defense and they've got enough offense already. Like it's okay that he's not a guy that can generate his own offense, but also if you still want him to contribute on that end of the floor, whether it's through rim running, cutting, offensive putbacks, you probably want him to play with Luka as much as possible because you want Luka to set him up.
Yep.
You know,
I mean, the offense I'm not worried about.
Yeah,
this is all
but if
defense.
he's coming off the bench when Luka is on the like if he's coming into the game and Luka's not on the floor and there's no one to, you know, if maybe Kyrie's not on the floor, like, you know, that might be tough for him to not, you know, maybe clog up spacing, things like that. With at least when Luka's on the floor, the pressure is totally off him on offense. I mean, it should be anyway. I'm just saying, I think that it just makes more sense to match his minutes with Luka as much as possible, just to get him easy buckets. And Kirk, I was a big man in high school. I think technically you were too, in terms of like we were garbage men. And when we played high school, it's a lot easier to do the garbage work when you get the ball occasionally.
Yep.
So I think him playing with Luka, getting some really easy lobs can help his confidence, and that might help him. I mean, I know this sounds weird, but it might help him on the defensive end, just to feel into the game. Sure. As opposed to maybe coming off the bench and he's like ignored because Luka's off the floor.
Well, in the days since the draft, and really the days leading up to the draft, because I think he had a pretty good idea the Mavericks were going to try to take him. He said a lot of the right things. He said a lot of the right things since, and I'm just it's nice because, and I mean no shots. Well, this is a shot, but it's just like after McGee and after Christian Wood, I'm not interested in big men that are more concerned about their fifis. Like, sorry, you play with generational big man, or you play with generational guards. Like,
go back even further. Willie Cauley-Stein, Samuel Dalembert, Chris Kaman. These guys that wanted numbers and wanted to get the ball thrown to them in the post. It's been a struggle. I don't know if I've ever seen a top 12 pick the night of being drafted being like, I'm excited to set screens.
Well, that's the bitch of it for me when I go look at some of this stuff. And a lot of Duke fans have sort of corrected me on this. Like, they've basically told me that Duke does so much motion offense, you're not seeing a lot of screen and roll. The one thing I firmly believe is that screen setting is something that can be learned. It is a tandem process, not just on the big, it is also with the guard. Like, I have real beef when Luka Doncic doesn't use screens, but and puts his guys in tough situations because he wants the mismatch versus like the actual process of a screen and a roll. But if he's willing to do these things, Luka's going to make him a lot of money. He's going to be on the offensive end. I'm not concerned because a lot of this stuff is pure energy and effort. And, you know, we all mock Dwight Powell for time to time, but the reason Dwight Powell worked for years and years is the same reason Tyson Chandler worked for years and years, or not years and years, for the 2010-2011 season. Tyson Chandler rolled hard every stinking time, every time. And it cannot be understated how important that is to an offense. The threat, the lob threat, the roll threat, of which Dwight Powell is very good at, matters. It's why Willie Cauley-Stein could not cook it, because he wanted to be fancy and do all the shit that he did in his mixtapes. It's why Pizza Hands, Sam Dalembert never worked out, because he just didn't have the physical capacity to do it. I'm hopeful that on the offensive end, this stuff comes out in the wash. It's the defensive end where he's going to have to take a real crash course. We're going to see a lot of fouls. We're going to see a lot of bad plays, but you have to you have to work through it. You can't do the thing that Rick Carlisle did to Josh Green, which was one mistake and you're done. It just can't happen.
No, that's not the way. And we've already seen with Green, he seems to play better when he plays more.
Yeah.
So
he looked like
saw that
toast by the end of the year. He was like,
I
played a lot this year.
he hit the rookie wall in year 3, which was kind of funny. But yeah, I mean,
I think that allows for kind of a soft transition. Omax, who I know even less about, and I have not sullied my opinion on looking at tape, but the data and the athletic measurables, he is a basketball athlete. Probably one of the top 5, if you include like Amen and Osar Thompson, in terms of basketball athletes. Now, you're probably going to wonder what I mean by that. And what I'm saying is like the athleticism he possesses translates directly to assisting his play on the basketball floor. He's not doing it's. I'm not talking like a 48-inch vertical for the sake of having a 48-inch vertical. The kind of quickness, the arm length. I mean, the data on him when he sticks with his man, like he's like a face guard guy, like a true the guy he's going to be guarding. We like to call Dorian a lockdown defender. Dorian was a chaotic, excellent help defender that often got pinned as the stopper because he had to be. I don't think it was his best fit. That's why when him and Bullock really worked in tandem. So I'm really looking forward to see what Omax can do on defense, and anything else past that is going to be a bonus.
Yeah, he's kind of like it's like a Dorian. This is gonna probably be like I don't even want to say it, but he feels like a Dorian with more talent, which is not a knock necessarily against Dorian. Dorian worked hard to get to where he was. This Prosper is already double-digit per game scorer in college. His 3-pointer is coming along, but in terms of just like his athleticism, he's got a 7'1" wingspan. It's pretty crazy. And like you said, Logan, when I did our pre-draft talk, I think when he did mention Prosper, he was like, they had him face guard and chase Jordan Hawkins, the Connecticut guard, who also went in the first round, 14 to New Orleans, who's like an off-ball, off-screen shooter. They put him on him and had him run him through screens and stuff. And like that's normally not what you ask 6'8", 7'1" guys to do. Like you don't usually want them running through screens and things like that because their frame just isn't really built for that kind of stuff. But he did it, and he did it really well. You look at the games Marquette played against UConn. I don't think Jordan Hawkins had great games in those games, and that you can attribute a lot of that to Prosper. I love this pick. He's like the perfect type of pick for getting back into the first round. You look at some of the wings that were taken around him, and he seems like the most NBA ready to contribute in terms of, his defense should be like a day one. Like it's not going to be fantastic because rookies usually aren't great defenders, but you can get him on the floor. I actually think he'll probably play more minutes next season than Lively will.
I think so too.
And I don't think that's crazy, but I'm a believer. It's exactly what they needed. It makes the draft make so much more sense, instead of just coming out with Lively. I don't know what else to say. Like, again, I don't know his game super well, but I just know his athleticism is off the charts. The flag is he only had like 12 blocks in his college career, which is really crazy. And you
luck into blocks.
Yeah, usually like we've talked to smart draft people. That's like one of the things they look at first with these like big athlete guys is like, okay, what's their steals? What's their block rate? And if it's low, like that's a red flag. And it was low for him. But you can make the case it was a little low because they had him at the point of attack so much. He wasn't necessarily
if you're face guarding someone, you're not coming off to get weak side help blocks ever.
Yeah, and let's be real. If his blocks numbers were awesome, he's probably like a 15. Like he's not available at 24. Like there's always there's always something that makes the guy available later in the first round. Because when I watch, I mean, of course it's YouTube highlights, so it's biased, but every time I've watched him, I'm just like, how is he available at 24? Like he's exactly what every NBA team
Some
needs.
of the picks that happen in 20 to 40 blow my mind. Like while I'm just thinking this out loud, that the Lakers got Maxwell Lewis at 40, I could have died because it's just like that was another guy who I hope the Mavericks were interested in. They worked him out. Yeah. And I think had maybe Omax gone differently, they might have taken Lewis that early. And that's just, that's just the way this stuff goes sometimes.
Right.
So, okay, guys, while we're gonna take a short break for our podcast for the recording, but if you could do me a favor and go ahead and hit the subscribe button, to the Pod Mavericks YouTube channel. That sort of stuff helps us over time. It doing the work in the off season will eventually make this show, and as Josh and I figure out how we're doing this, it'll make it better in the regular season as well. If you could also do me a favor and hit the like button for this particular stream, that would be great. I would really appreciate that. Okay, now I think it's kind of, we could probably continue to talk about the draft itself for another half hour, but we had an odd morning where friend of the show, Mark Stein, dropped a truly fascinating report that the Dallas Mavericks last week pre-draft, and I'm not really sure when the talks sort of broke off, but the Mavericks made a play for former 2018 number 1 overall pick DeAndre Ayton. They offered, and this is the part that just floored me, Tim Hardaway Jr., Richaun Holmes, and JaVale McGee. And according to his story, the Suns got hung up on JaVale McGee, which, before we talk about this more than anything else,
we all get hung up on JaVale McGee.
the Mavericks shouldn't have signed JaVale McGee. So the fact that he's the hang point for a potential like super blockbuster. I know a lot of people are up and down on Ayton. I don't care. Former number 1 overall pick. Like, that's a fucking fascinating thing.
Yeah,
and
that's
to get like, for the guy that we all didn't like after 2 games to be, it's the guy who has a 3-year deal. Remember guys, he has a player option for his 3rd deal. Oh, what that was, bar none, the worst offseason signing for any team. So congratulations for that last year. Now, let's work our way through our feelings with this proposed Ayton deal. Now, the thing that before I give you a second, sorry, was that Stein was kind of unclear as to whether he thinks the deal is on, like, they've said no, but it's not a no to the deal. It's a no to that specific 3-person for 1 guy trade. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means it's still alive. And I don't really know how to talk about this because, and so please guys, particularly y'all listen to this live, like, give us a little bit of grace in that we might say some things that are like incorrect because we're sort of really, I'm still working through my feelings on this. I don't know whether I would want the Mavericks to do it or not.
Yeah. And what I'm curious about is the timing of these talks, because if the Mavericks were offering Holmes, that means they had already done the deal and drafted Lively theoretically, because there wasn't that much time between them making that trade, getting apologies. They already drafted Lively by the time they got Holmes, because they got Holmes to get the 24th pick.
They must have known they were getting Holmes at some point in the week before the draft.
Maybe, yeah. That's because I'm like, when they were making these negotiations with the Suns and they offered this trade, did they already know that they have Lively on their roster? Because I think that changes how I think about how they're negotiating about it. Because if they don't know they're taking Lively when they make that offer, which still seems weird because Holmes isn't on the Mavs until they took Lively. So like you said, maybe they just assumed they had that deal. They just knew that they were going to
trade for pick 24. Yeah. They're going to select a player, and then they're going to, it's like, it's probably like a complicated if-then statement. Like, they knew they were going to trade back and select somebody. Then they knew they'd create a trade exception like that. Right. It's really complicated. I mean, and it is. Like, hats off to the Mavericks, because we often kick the shit out of them for the past several years for being very linear in their thinking. This was not linear. This was like a tiered approach where there was a lot of like, if this happens, then we do this kind of things involved. It's very fascinating.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's causing a lot of consternation online, well, there's a couple things. One, some people, you're either in on Ayton or you're out, and he's a very divisive player. So that's going to obviously heat the conversation up a lot. The way he went from a pillar of a finals team to, in consecutive playoffs, getting benched for Bismack Biyombo and Jock Lawndale, like, that's quite the descent. So he's going to have people that believe in the version of him that helped take that team to the finals. And then there's going to be people that think he's the version that got benched for Biyombo and Lawndale the last 2 years. So that's going to obviously make things spicy when you're arguing about this online. The other thing is, it's just the idea of Lively being ready, and you don't know if he's going to be ready. And I think most people agree, like, hey, it would be cool to have a stopgap veteran center so Lively doesn't have to start.
Oh, there's no such thing as $100 million stopgap.
Yes. I understand that Lively might not be ready while Ayton's contract is here, but it's just to spend $30+ million a season on a player that you just think is, hey, we just need someone to sop up these minutes until the real guy we like is ready. You just have to think about resource management. And I understand that their cap is kind of screwed no matter what. And I also understand that another thing that makes this tricky is that if you're looking at it in a vacuum, Ayton for Tim Hardaway Jr., Holmes, just that alone, like you look at that on paper and you're like, that's
old.
Right.
That's Ethan in the chat just says Ayton for bench warmers.
Yeah. Even as much as you might like Tim Hardaway Jr., that's just an objectively good swap for the Mavericks in terms of just doing good business. Ayton's 24. He could be awesome in these next 3 years and playing next to Luka. It's just tough for me if they, just drafting Lively and then getting Ayton. Those guys can't play on the floor together. I know some people have talked to me and been like, oh, well, they could, Ayton played the foursome in college. I'm like, you just have to watch, and Karl Anthony Towns and Gobert play together. And it's like, well, Karl Anthony Towns, shoots 40% on 5 or whatever threes he takes per game. Like, none of these Lively, maybe he's a shooter, but you cannot make this deal projecting that, because that is a shot in the dark that his high school tape somehow, progresses him in there. Well, so it's just tough for me, because I do think the path of getting a veteran to start at the beginning of the season makes a lot of sense, and I agree with that. I'm just like, why does it have to be a 24-year-old, no former number 1 overall pick that costs $30 million a season? Like, that just doesn't seem smart to me. I don't understand the logic there in terms of the on the court. I understand the logic for the on paper stuff.
Right, like if they hadn't have taken Lively, had they taken Cam Whitmore, or if they traded back again and selected a second wing, I would be pounding the table for this one. But if you invest this much in Lively, you have to, and if you do want a veteran stopgap, a mentor, a person, it's not 24-year-old Call of Duty playing. I mean, frankly, like, if you watch, like he doesn't like basketball. I'm sorry, he doesn't. He wants to play like Dirk, and he's not Dirk. He's not a very good rim protector. He's a mountain of a man. And I honestly feel like if you're super into him, then you're approaching this like we see, people, it's like people in trying to get into a relationship where they're like, I can fix him. I can fix her. Just give me time. With all due respect, he would be going from teams where he has played with multiple first-round Hall of Famers, like Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, probably Devin Booker when it's all said and done. And he's just going to come to the Mavericks and Luka's going to fix him. Okay. Like, I really like that from a faith perspective, but if he can't handle playing with Chris Paul, I don't think he can handle playing with Luka. Luka doesn't have time for this shit. Luka is a competitor. It's the Arrested Development meme. Yeah, that's right. It might work for us. Now, the flip side of this argument has to be his relationship with Monty Williams deteriorated so badly that maybe he just needs a fresh start. My counter would be Jason Kidd is going to fix him. Maybe. Obviously. Yeah. I mean, I still think, like, just to be quite candid, I still think this happens. Like, just my gut is that something like that doesn't get out on the Maverick side unless they feel some leverage can get there. I have heard from asking around that Frank Vogel really wants a shot with him, and that's why the Suns are being a little bit probably pretty resistant. But I just sort of feel like this goes over the goal line, and then we find ourselves asking these kind of questions. And from a basketball point of view, like, so I saw somebody in the chat say earlier, that the Suns may insist on like Reggie Bullock getting into the deal. When you go from a roster standpoint, that would mean the Mavericks have precisely no volume 3-point shooters. Is there a plan to sign a volume 3-point shooter? Luka Doncic, you're the one that keeps pounding this point in the table. Luka Doncic is the single best volume 3-point shot creator in the league with his drives. Better than Shea, better than LeBron. It's Luka. So if you don't have anybody that's going to be able to take those shots, that's a pretty big hole to fill. It just is. Now it's not to say I wouldn't do the deal. I mean, I'm pretty much at the moment pure 50-50. Like I could be swayed either way.
Yeah, it's tough for me because, like I said, I understand if you're looking at these guys like a line item and asset management, like of course you would rather have 24-year-old DeAndre Ayton than 30-year-old Tim Hardaway Jr. and Richaun Holmes. Like yes, even if Bullock's added to the deal, like it makes a lot of sense. I'm just trying to figure out how it works on the floor because there's a lot of talk of like, well, DeAndre Ayton's an asset and you can flip him later. And it's like, we've seen in this league when teams treat guys like assets and not players and not humans, that doesn't always work out. Like DeAndre Ayton, I don't know what his mindset would be coming here, but I don't think he would want, is Dereck Lively the future? Like he's going to want to play. Like he's not like maybe like I don't think he's going to be cool. Like if Dereck Lively, like what if there's a scenario in February where like the advanced data is showing that the Mavericks are playing better with Lively than with Ayton, even if Ayton's doing well. And it's like Ayton's making $30 million a year. That's just not a guy you can be like, all right, well, we're going to bench him or we're just going to trade. It's hard to trade him. Even if he does turn his career around in Dallas. His contract makes so much. It's going to be tough. The Atlanta just gave away John Collins for nothing.
Yeah,
like, what are you going to get for Ayton if he has to be an all-star if you think you're going to get something good back?
And that's a problem. That's a bridge you cross when you come to it. But I feel like the logic behind, well, if it doesn't work, you just trade him. Like the Suns can't trade him. Like nobody. The Suns cannot trade him. It's you're.
And if they do trade him, it's for a package that we're saying right now is a poo-poo platter.
And granted, my friend Dwight of the 21 Going on 77 podcast makes this point about Kristaps Porzingis a lot, where Kristaps Porzingis, new Boston Celtic Kristaps Porzingis, really rebounded his own personal trade value with a really good season. And so looking back on what the Mavericks did at the time with what they got, you might say, the Mavericks got screwed on that trade. No, when the Mavericks traded him, he had no value. He was on the way back up, but relative to where he had been, Kristaps couldn't move. And so it's like right now, if I'm playing devil's advocate to a degree, I'd say, well, DeAndre Ayton is coming off of two really, really subpar performances in the playoffs and has a lot of baggage. And so you're saying, all right, we could fix him. We could do it. I don't hate the argument. I just don't find it. I just think it's a lot riskier than it's like laid out to be. Because it's just when you view it from a 50,000 foot angle, you can trade some guys that you don't love. Though I love the comments in the chat where it's like, we don't like go look at the Mavericks record when Tim Hardaway Jr. shot certain percentages. Like basically he shot 45% and they won. And then when he didn't shoot 45%, the Mavericks lost. Like Hardaway was vital to the Mavericks. It's just something we're not really giving credit to, even though I wish he wasn't so vital. I would like to, I just think it changes the fundamentals of the Mavericks in ways that we're not entirely addressing just because all of us are somewhat tired of the Tim Hardaway experience, which I get.
So. And also I don't want people to be confused that it's like, I don't want them to trade Tim Hardaway. It's just, you can make an argument, and a certain someone on our website did to that got us all in a lot of trouble.
What do you mean? You mean nobody liked Xavier's article? This is news to me.
You can make the argument that just even putting the resources into Lively is maybe too rich for a one-way center in terms of not a star. Like you usually don't see centers in the top 15 selected that aren't stars. So so to add on to that, here's a $30 million a year center on top of that also might not project to be in that all-star tier who's coming off too bad. I don't know if I want to fix him. Like, I understand you need to do something with your assets that you have, but the downside is you don't fix him and you're stuck with a $30 million lemon. And like, is that risk worth it for what the upside is? And to me, the upside is you trade him for something else. Like, okay, the upside for me is if they're trading is like, I would rather have a player that helps them. But again, like I said, I'm not married to Tim Hardaway Jr. Like, I'm not saying don't trade Tim Hardaway Jr. Like, if they can find a deal for him, that makes a lot of sense.
Like, Tim Hardaway had no trade value, like, in the first 30 games. So it's like that he's invested or involved in a trade is pretty interesting. Now, that then brings us to, I think, like the free agency portion of this. And these things are related, okay? We're learning, Scott, CBA Mavs, wrote an explainer about whether the Mavericks would have access to the full MLE, what it would mean if they traded for Ayton, yada, yada, yada. The elephant in the room that I don't think anybody is talking about, because there's a lot of Mavericks fans that have chosen the Kyrie Irving is going to resign. The end. I get it. If Kyrie Irving doesn't make a quick decision entering free agency, the Mavericks options they're in trouble. Like, they're held hostage by Kyrie. Just there's really no other way to phrase it. That's okay.
Yeah, that deal needs to either not get done or get done. Like, that needs to be settled.
There needs to be a decision Friday afternoon. And if they don't have that decision by Friday afternoon, the Mavericks run into problems because they have so much money committed. Now, getting out from under Bertans helps, but like, if you were to trade for Ayton before Friday, and then it makes all this really hard, because if the Ayton element of it all, it's 32 million on top of Luka's like 40, like his is probably like 46. I can't remember. And it's just all of a sudden you're over the cap and you have these very limited things you can do. And, part of what was really interesting about getting off of Davis Bertans' contract is it did open up the Mavericks to the full mid-level exception, which I felt was important right up until Ayton became available. And as multiple people have noted online, anybody that you can get with the full mid-level exception is probably and very likely not as good as DeAndre Ayton is. And it's just a good point. But I find myself just sort of a little more concerned than I was right after draft night, because the Mavericks have to figure out depth. They have to figure out depth. They cannot do what they did last year. And it really feels like they're going to give, another season of Theo. Whoops. And so it's just, they have to have real players. And it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough whether, Kyrie resigns or not, whether they trade for Ayton or not. If you trade for Ayton and also re-sign Kyrie, depending on how much Kyrie were to sign for, you basically would have those three guys and then everyone else on a minimum. Like, you would not, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. So.
Yeah. And it's just, for me, again, I hear the arguments like it's objectively a good talent swap. I'm the guy who pounds the table and says center does not need to be the position you invest all your resources in. I've been saying for years, you look at the draft and you look at where these role-playing bigs come from. Robert Williams of the Celtics, 27th pick. Rudy Gobert was a 27th pick. Mitchell Robinson was a second-round pick. Maxi Kleber was an undrafted free agent. And I understand that there are the Jokic's and the Embiid's and the Karl. Like, there are exceptions to this. There are still superstar centers, but you have to be in that tier. And if you're not in that tier, it drops a little bit. So yep. I've always pounded the table for the way this league is going. Teams usually get smaller in the playoffs, not bigger, when you're talking about lineups. The thing is it's trying to play small without actually being small. Like, the thing is is trying to find the 6'8", 6'9" wing that can play four, that allows you to play two bigs, but he's not actually a big. He's a perimeter-based wing, but he's still huge. You look at Andrew Wiggins on the Warriors and the Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum's for Boston, and and so on and so forth for some of these contenders. So it's just hard for me personally to think that investing the 12th overall pick and then $30+ million a year into a position that I think you should be way cheaper on. Like that clashes with how I view team building and stuff like that. And I understand that, that I'm not saying that's right. I could be wrong. Might be nice to have Ayton if they can turn him around and guard Jokic. I don't know. Like, I mean, if you can turn around, he's the type of guy that you'd want to do that. So I get it. And then also I want to break bread and offer an olive branch. I'm totally understanding of the fans that are tired of the 2018-2019 roster that has lasted.
We have been tired of it. Yeah, that's been our shtick for 2 years.
If Tim Hardaway Jr. is traded for Ayton, that means in the last couple of years, Dorian's gone, Tim Hardaway Jr. is gone. The last guys are Maxey and Powell. And if you make this trade, Powell is probably gone because they're not going to re-sign him. If you trade for DeAndre Ayton, I don't see why you would re-sign Dwight Powell. So then it's just
I heard the Rockets have interest in him, which is just hysterical to me.
It's like half. I'm a Dwight Powell guy, but half, right? So again, that's appealing to me as just someone as I'm also sick of the roster stagnation. I would love to have a bunch of new guys in here. And if you're trading for Ayton, you're accomplishing that too. So I get part of it is, part of it might be I don't even care how good they are or how it helps. Like it'd just be nice to watch a different roster. There's definitely
very different.
That feels that. Yes.
I mean, it would be very different. I mean, that comes back to sort of my thought. If they trade Ayton and let's say they're really insistent on like Reggie Bullock, who wasn't very good for the Mavericks last year and is only partially guaranteed, the Mavericks would have to find some specific solutions on the cheap that really panned out. You just, as much as we hate on Hardaway on occasion and on Reggie Bullock, you would have to find shooting. Kyrie Irving is a dead-eye standstill shooter, but and frankly, so is Luka when he actually takes the damn shots. But that's not going to be your best use of those guys at all times, standing in the corner while somebody else goes over. Coops in the chat says, "Oh, this is a real." Some of the players mentioned this is a really good center rotation. I can't like my beef with I've seen Ayton get cooked alive. Yeah. I'm sorry, I've just seen him. He's become fried chicken, and so it's like and granted, Jokic is going to do that to people. So, but it's like oddly enough, like Dwight Powell caused him a lot of problems. It's so many things.
Yeah.
You're right. Josh, you're right about that. Bullock's deal becomes fully guaranteed at midnight, which is it's 10 million.
They're not gonna. Yeah, they're not. They're gonna. I don't think they're gonna try to save him the $5 million there. But the thing I also don't understand is I don't really see the Suns' point of view other than like they're just sick of this guy and they want to get rid of him. But the weird part is the people that were sick of him the most are not with that organization anymore. Like it was Monty Williams and Chris Paul that like really dogged Ayton, right? So they're gone. And like you said, Frank Vogel has a history of getting the most out of big men.
Yeah.
What he did in Indiana, look what he did with Anthony Davis in their title-winning season in LA. I totally believe the whispers you're hearing that he would love to try to reclaim him and invest into him and try to make him a contributor. Because I understand Phoenix has holes on the roster elsewhere, but it's like they really need Tim Hardaway and like, do they really hate Ayton that much that they want to trade him for guys that I don't even know how much they would play for them?
Yeah, it reads so weird. Yeah. Well, I think they would play for them because they're kind of in. There's a built-in level of injury fuckery with that.
Yeah, that's true too. Team. And
so
Beal, Beal and Durant aren't going to play.
I mean, did you see? There was. I'm gonna let you talk about something. Michael Levin had one of the funniest tweets I've seen about the Spurs or about that Phoenix team. I'm gonna have to read it to you, but it's just. It's really incredible the kind of things that go on when you're trying to build a team when you don't have options, and it's wild. Anyway, so you riff your next point. I have to find this because this thing made me laugh so hard.
Yeah, like I said, this is really conflicting for me. I just don't agree with the idea of dumping a lot of valuable resources into the center position, knowing how other teams have gotten them for cheaper. But I also understand you have to play the hand that you're dealt. And if the Mavericks can only invest into that position because that's what's available, and they can't spin Tim Hardaway Jr. into a wing that they like that would get rotation minutes or potentially be a starter, I get it. But yeah, it's tricky. If they did this deal, they would still, I would imagine if they still had access to the MLE, they would still need to find a starter at the 4, unless you want to throw Prosper in there right away. Like it's Luka, Kyrie, Ayton, and then if you're trading Tim Hardaway, is it Bullock? And then who's the other guy? Because you can't have Bullock play the 4. We just watched the whole season of Bullock trying to play the 4. He cannot play the 4. You're doing him a disservice. So they would, is it Grant Williams he can play the 4? Can you get him for the MLE? I don't know, but we'll see. I certainly understand the desire for just new faces and talent. It would be pretty funny to have DeAndre Ayton on the team with Luka, considering they're in the same draft.
They are friends though, and they share
the same agent.
Share the same agent. Like that's not something to overlook. I think that's a value. And
in the budding Suns Mavericks fans rivalry, if Ayton turns into an all-star in Dallas, like how funny would that be? So yeah.
Well, and particularly after the fact that they cooked, the Mavericks cooked Atlanta to death. Like that's a done deal.
Yeah.
It's just and sort of
because that pick didn't turn into anything. That's right. Didn't do anything. But
I did, while looking for this, I came across that picture of Victor Wembanyama with the Spurs, with Sean
Duncan
Elliott
and David Robinson,
is one of the most insane things I've ever seen. He is so much bigger than 2 of the greatest basketball. I mean, really 3. I mean, if you include Manu, 3 of the greatest basketball players of all time. My God.
Yeah, he's a freak. And hey, maybe does the Wembanyama being in your division for the next 20 years, maybe, does that influence the Mavericks decision making into, hey, we need centers? Like we're going to be playing Victor Wembanyama 4 times a year for the next how many years? At least 5 to 10. Maybe that factors into it, also.
That's a really strong point.
I can't blame them if they're if he's 80% of what we think he is, he's all like he's one of the great, he's one of the best NBA players ever.
But I can't find the stupid thing I was looking for because of
course. What are you trying to find?
It was basically like a series of Chris Haynes tweets where it's like the Suns were bringing in guys where it quickly became like 2010 like G League talk about some guys where it's dudes you hadn't heard of in like 7 or 8 years that the Suns were bringing in for workouts. Just while I'm thinking about the Wembanyama of it all, it's so fucking annoying that we have had to deal, Jean Morant, who I believe will come back bigger, better, brighter after figuring out how to not use flash weapons on social media. I also expect him to develop a jump shot. Maybe Zion Williamson will get his shit in gear, but that's 2, quasi-generational players. Then you have Victor Wembanyama, and then who else is like in this godforsaken division? Now the Rockets might have, they got
man, and if Thompson and Whitmore pan out, can you imagine playing that team 4 times a year?
I mean, it just the hits keep coming, and I mean hits. Like the Mavericks still have the best player in the division, and that's all that matters. But
I know
it blows my mind.
And it's funny because it was like that with Dirk, with Duncan, and then Houston.
Much meaner. That's our yeah.
So
all right. So I just got told from my guy Coops there, he was killing me on this. It's like the Suns will bring in thank you, Coops, for this. Phoenix will host a free agent workout on Wednesday featuring notables Jabari Parker and Stanley Johnson, league sources say. Then the next one was Phoenix will also bring in veteran point guard Chasson Randall for workouts.
Who?
And then there was even sources guard Quindary Weatherspoon will be included in the workout as well. I mean, it was like they were pulling dudes off of 2K Create a Player. And when I read the names, like, oh yeah, that guy, like, it's my.
That was like the pandemic, the 2021 season when every team had 8 guys out in health and safety protocols, and Mavericks are signing Brandon Knight and Marquise Chris and all these names that we had talked about. It kind of reminded me of that.
Well, this has been fun. Do we have anything else we need to cover? Like Mavs Moneyball has more content than I knew what to do with.
I mean, free agency is Friday, so we'll get some answers to a lot of these questions pretty soon. That's about it.
We still have stuff coming. We're probably trying to do 2 to 3 posts a day. Stuff will really start to slow down, and then I'm going to Vegas to cover Summer League, which that's going
to be the funnest Summer League team you will have ever
I've
watched.
covered 10 years of and I might I want to say it was Brian from Mavs Moneyball who said he would go maybe write about some of the teams of the past. I've watched some horrendous rosters.
Yes.
And it's guys where it's there's one NBA player amongst the whole group, and because the Mavericks just didn't have picks. And that's just the way it shakes out sometimes. But yeah, we'll probably slow down eventually. I'm going to host a show Friday during kind of the openings of the free agency stuff. Just kind of happens to coincide with that, I think. I'm not sure what time I'm going to do it. My son is at the Richardson basketball camp this week. And so I might have to go over there and, watch him do some stuff on Friday, but I'll definitely be hosting a show Friday. I don't know. I'm just kind of hanging out. Yeah. Ethan asks, what day does the trade go down for Ayton? I sort of think it's important to do it before free agency starts if they're going to do it, but that's just my opinion.
I think the one thing though, I don't think if Holmes is involved,
they either do it now or they don't do it till the season starts, basically.
I don't think the Holmes trade with Prosper can be official until July 6th, I think is what I heard, which is when contracts can be signed. Because, free agency starts July 1st, but that's not actual. That's when you can negotiate. Contracts can be signed, I believe, July 6th. So, yeah, someone in the chats, Jeremy says, it can't happen officially until the 6th. So, I guess they can agree to the parameters of a trade, but yeah, there won't be. My guess is if Ayton is traded, there won't be a DeAndre Ayton press conference until after the 6th. But we'll see. They have till then to try to maybe expand it, make it a 3-team. Maybe the Prosper part of it becomes part of with Ayton, expand it and do a 3-team deal. So we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, that's about all I got. Keep checking out Mavs Moneyball. Please subscribe to the show here. And if anybody's going to Vegas for Summer League, hit me up. I'm just a dude
with be your friend in Vegas. He will be your wise sage.
Yeah.
You're a Vegas veteran.
Well, I mean, it's also just I'm like a dude with internet access. It's always weird to go out there and see real journalists and stuff, and it's just because they all go out there to schmooze, and I'm out there writing game recaps for fucking the 3rd Summer League game of the week, and these guys are looking at me like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Look, this is what I was put on earth to do: is write garbage copy about a Summer League basketball team." So. Anyway, thanks so much for hanging out with us for close to an hour. Thanks so much for all the support this week. Please hit me up. And also, just one more thing before we go. I always forget to do this. We have an email, podmaverickpodcast@gmail.com. If you have questions that you would like me to address, I will start off the live show probably addressing some of these. So if you could shoot me an email address with what you want to cover, podmaverickpodcast@gmail.com. That would be great. This has been Kirk Henderson and Josh Bowe of Pod Maverick After Dark. We will talk with you guys probably next week at this time. Have a great rest of your week.